Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Niche Cast. It's your boy, the Diggly Doodah Doc, Mr. Peptoy Panther, here with the Wobbly Wildcard. We're going to deliver up a bit of our Kiwi sports chit-chat. Today we are going to be touching on UFC. Dan Hooker's got a fight. There was some more cricketing movements around Aotearoa with a couple of contract lists seeping out. And then we're going to be delivering all sorts of football content, big football things happening with the restart of play, primarily in Europe. Tomorrow, Friday, we're going to be dropping another email newsletter. So if you do like the Niche Cache and the Niche Cast and whatever other shit we serve up, sign up to the email newsletter Fridays and Mondays, and also support us directly up the gut on Patreon, and shout out to all our beautiful patrons as well. Wobbly Wildcard, talofa namaste.
Yeah, how are we? It's a bit of a bloody gloomy day today where I am, but I just got a little thing on my phone. I get like the meditation app that I use pops up at like the same time every day with a little cheeky witticism thing, and it came through just as you're doing that intro. And it says, feelings come and go like clouds in a windy sky. Conscious breathing is my anchor. That was a quote from some guy called Chich Dat Han, something along those lines. But anyway, a bit of wisdom to start off your day and to start off the old podcast.
I think that's a nice substitute for your weather yarns, so we might just get a little...
Well, it's weather related, isn't it? The old windy sky reference or whatever it was.
Indeed it is. But I look forward to a couple more quotes every podcast. We might just get you a little...
Well, we have to start at this time then, because otherwise I'll miss it.
Well, you can write it down and then remember it.
Sure, I could screenshot it or something.
I'm sure you'll figure out a way.
I'll keep them in mind for you.
Well, I look forward to it. And I'm also, wildcard, looking forward to Dan Hooker versus Dustin Poirier. And that is going down next week, I believe, June 27th, it may be. June 27th, which will probably end up being June 28th New Zealand time. Yep, the Sunday afternoon. And this is the start of Kiwi UFC matters after the lockdown and the pandemic. So it's logistically wildcard. No idea how this is happening. Like, Dan Hooker has to go to... I think this is at the Apex Center, which is in Las Vegas, so I imagine he's already on his way, or he better get there soon. It's not part of the Fight Island stuff. It's all just going down at the Apex Center. This fight was actually meant to happen, I think, in May, or even similar date in June on a San Diego card. So it was already locked in, and Dan Hooker's now got the fight properly locked in for next Sunday. Oh, it's a good one. I'll be serving up plenty of content next week to like preview it and suss it out, wildcard. But just getting my take a week out, it's going to be very interesting. Dan Hooker's on a bit of a rise. Dustin Poirier actually fought Khabib Nurmagomedov in his last fight and suffered the fate that most people do, getting wrestled, taken down, and then beaten the shit out of. So Poirier's he's at the top, but he's just hit a little plateau after that loss to Khabib. Dan Hooker's just on the rise, and Dan Hooker's ranked number 5 and Poirier's ranked number 3, so that puts into perspective where Hooker is in the lightweight division of the UFC.
So what do you reckon that means for his chances in the fight? I mean, if he's ranked a couple places lower and on the way up against a guy who's been at the top and is perhaps just a little bit vulnerable at the moment, I mean, that might give him a decent opening to do something useful, but it also means presumably he will be the underdog going into the fight. Although, as we well know, Kiwi sports folk tend to quite enjoy a cheeky underdog tag, especially when it's not as sort of earned as perhaps it might seem on the surface.
For sure, and this is on the back of our last podcast episode where we had a little discussion around like NRL stats, and I think this is the beauty of the niche caches, that we use and understand statistics in the context of all the other things that go into sussing out sport, like the eye test and the vibes and the momentum and all that stuff. And in the email newsletter from Monday, I compared the stats of Poirier and Hooker, and like there were 4 stats like striking accuracy, striking output, takedown accuracy, takedown output, takedown defense, and stuff like that. And Poirier was significantly superior in all of those stats. So that shows where these two, like this, that's why Poirier's already had a title fight against arguably one of, if not the best ever MMA fighter in Khabib. That's like Poirier's already reached that, and that's an example, and it just puts into context who Poirier is in this division. But stylistically, and given Hooker's like more recent antics, I think it could be a ripe old chance for an upset. Hooker's got absolutely beautiful striking, not quite that Israel Adesanya style, but anyone coming out of city kickboxing is well versed in punches, elbows, knees, kicks, feints, fakes, movement, switching stances. All of that stuff could genuinely trouble Poirier, because Poirier may have ambitions of like going toe-to-toe with Hooker, and that's not going to work. Now, you're not going to go toe-to-toe with Hooker and beat him, because he can absolutely take a beating, but he's got like real nice striking. So it's just more up to what like Poirier does. Is Poirier going to go try a couple of takedowns? Dan Hooker's got nifty takedown defense as well. Like city kickboxing is very good wrestling on top of their striking. So stats-wise, and I think general consensus, like when you understand Poirier just fought Khabib and those type of little details, Poirier is definitely the favorite. But just in, like stylistically, it is a great opportunity for Dan Hooker to get deep into the lightweight contender bracket.
And like, what's on the line either way? Like, if he loses, does that sort of like take him out of contention, or does he just hang around and have to, win a comparative fight next time and just sort of, stays on the fringes? And if he wins, then what happens? Like, does that put him? And would he get a crack at Khabib or something next, or would it just mean sort of like one more step on a continuing journey sort of thing? Like, break down both those two outcome kind of thing.
A loss wouldn't really matter. A loss would just keep him where he is. And it's very interesting because the lightweight division is arguably like one of the more stacked divisions in the UFC. So a win wouldn't necessarily put Hooker in that realm. Like, Justin Gaethje is the next in line to fight Khabib. That's probably going to happen. Justin Gaethje defeated Tony Ferguson recently, and he's the interim champion. So Khabib's champ, number 1 contender, Justin Gaethje. Number 2, Tony Ferguson. Number 3, Dustin Poirier. Number 4, Conor McGregor. Number 5, Dan Hooker. Conor McGregor's a bit of a non-factor as far as like rankings. Rankings aren't really a factor, but this is how we're measuring the division. Conor McGregor, who knows if he's going to fight again, and if he does, there's no certainty that it is in the lightweight division. Like, he might go to a different division, fight Jorge Masvidal. He might go to a different division and fight Nate Diaz. So Conor McGregor's presence at the top of those lightweight rankings doesn't mean so much. So the winner might get a fight against Tony Ferguson. And if Dan Hooker wins and then fights Tony Ferguson, holy shit, that would be really exciting, but it would also be very scary watching from like a supporting Dan Hooker perspective, because Tony Ferguson's coming off a loss and he is absolutely ridiculous. He is nasty. Like, he is neck level. He did lose, so I expect him to be like frothing to get back in there. So a win would put Dan Hooker if Dan Hooker wins this and City Kickboxing has middleweight champion Israel Adesanya, and then Dan Hooker at the top of the lightweight division, same division as Khabib, Justin Gaethje, Tony Ferguson, Dustin Poirier, that would be ridiculous. Factor on top of that, Alexander Volkanovski, who's an Australian who trains at City Kickboxing, he's locked in for a Fight Island fight rematch against Max Holloway in the featherweight division. So Volkanovski's already the champion, but if he defeats Holloway again, he would have defeated Holloway twice. Holloway's the absolute man, undisputed, undeniable champion of the featherweight division. So City Kickboxing would have 2 champions and Hooker right at the top of this most stacked division. It's 2020 could get a lot better for City Kickboxing, and considering where they're coming from in 2019, where they just blasted onto the scene as one of the best gyms in the world, to think that 2020 could get even better is pretty neck level.
Sweet as. So it sounds like one of those fights where it's going to be like, there's enough on stake, like there's enough at stake for the two dudes that it's going to be like all sorts of competitive, but also not like that all or nothing kind of stuff that makes fights a little panicky and frantic and stuff. Like, we should just get the best of each of these dudes. Sounds, somewhere in those rounds, which is, bloody exciting.
They'll be throwing hands, that's for sure. And like Dan Hooker's,
here we go.
Although there is a extra stat for our listeners here, just some takedown numbers. So to put into perspective, like, can we expect Dan Hooker to try and take down Dustin Poirier? At the moment, Dan Hooker averages 0.43 takedowns landed per 15 minutes. So that's like per round. So Dan Hooker is 0.43. Dustin Poirier is 1.55. So a little bit of takedowns mixed in with striking. Not huge amounts, but a considerable difference between the two. And then Khabib is 5.35. So Dan Hooker 0.43, Poirier 1.55, Khabib 5.35. So that's the difference in takedown output at the top of the lightweight division between those 3 fighters wildcard. I'm excited. And then later this year, you'll have Israel Adesanya against Costa. No doubt that we'll see Brad Riddell, Kai Kara France, Shane Young in action as well. So yeah, big things on the radar in terms of Kiwi UFC action. Well, okay, we'll move over to the cricket desk just for a little bit here, because we have a couple of contracts lists coming through. We don't need to go too deep into it because we're missing Northern Districts and Central Districts. And this is also the first round, so there is very little funk in the first round naming, other than the players we're going to talk about. Makes sense that the second round of contracts, where you're dealing with the fringe members, so adding a couple of players to the first round, that's where I think the much of the funk and the interest and the intrigue is. But we do have a couple of moves wildcard. Jeet Raval. He is leaving Auckland Aces to go to Northern Districts. Finn Allen is also leaving Auckland Aces to go to Wellington. And that's pretty much it. Remember, Daryl Mitchell is moving from Northern Districts to go to Canterbury. So wildcard. Quite interested. Quite interested to get your take on Jeet Raval moving to Northern Districts and what it means for Jeet Raval. Why did Jeet Raval do it? Is he making like a massive power move to keep his fucking Black Caps career alive? Like, what's your vibe there?
Yeah, my vibe is somewhere... I mean, first of all, my vibe was that when the Daryl Mitchell thing happened and it was announced a little bit ahead of time, probably because he's... you'd say he's the most prominent of the guys who's moved. I mean, Jeet Raval has been a test match opener, but is not currently a test match opener. So, big deal transfer there. And it was one where, like, just all the pieces seem to kind of fit together, like, for his career, for the next step in, competing for Black Cap spots, moving away from Colin de Gronholm, so it could be a bit more of a head-to-head, seeing as they're already seemingly poised as a head-to-head in that test team. Also, just the role vacated by Andy Ellis over. Well, I mean, he's just retired fully, but he had sort of been phasing out his career over the formats for the last year or two as well. Anyway, so there's just an easy, perfectly shaped role for him to slide into. His family situation as well. Like everything just seemed to fit really nicely for Daryl Mitchell moving to Canterbury in a way where it was just like, yeah, just a really funky, exciting, fun kind of transfer to see, like the sort of transfer you want, where it's the best thing for all parties. The Jeet Raval one, I didn't have an immediate feeling in that same way. Like I didn't get that same kind of like, this is exactly what everyone needed from this situation. But I think maybe, like thinking just a little deeper on it, having had some time to sort of ponder, I think from Jeet Raval's personal situation, it works quite nicely. Like, you think of where he was as when he went to Australia with the test team and he was out of form and he was thrown in the most ruthless, tough sort of environment you can have as touring Australia when they've got their, when they got their tails up and all that, like, and it didn't work out very well for him, and it was rather easy to predict that it wasn't going to work out with him, just the trajectory he had been on for a while there. And so, like, dropped from the test team, comes back to Auckland, and he had, like, easy to forget, he had, like, a useful little sort of 3 or 4 weeks there playing one-day cricket, and I think maybe even a little bit at the end of the Super Smash, I can't remember exactly. Like, he had a little spell there where he was actually a bit of a free-flowing, run-scoring opener. No massive scores. We definitely got a couple 50s. I can't remember if he got 100 in there or not. He might have, but I forget. But he did have a little, like, he showed some flashes of a different version of Jeet Raval. So, if he wants to take that even further and say, like, I'm still worthy of international cricket, not only in test match cricket, but in all formats, like, I'm gonna reinvent myself in this way and show this, show the world Jeet Raval 2.0. Well, then, you know, change your scenery, change your mind, change your perspective, change your reputation, all these things boiled in together. It makes sense that he would be looking for just a different place to move so he doesn't fall back into the old habits just from being in that same Auckland team and expected to do that same Auckland role kind of thing. Like, it makes sense on a personal level for him in that way. What it means for Northern Districts, I have less of a understanding about, less of a feeling about, but just as far as Jeet Raval goes, I can understand where he's getting at from that point of view.
Yeah, I don't actually view, like, until there is a bit more information, until you can see how teams are actually thinking with their playing 11. And I'm going to use the Otago Volts as an example of why the team perspective doesn't interest me so much, because you can see it now, and then come game time and you look at the Otago Volts, like, lineups that they had last year, and you can see how Dean Foxcroft and Nick Kelly and those type of new recruits were being used. Then you can build a picture around what it means for the team. So not too fussed what it means for Northern Districts Knights at the moment. For Jeet Raval wildcard, I think this is a hearty move, and I'll bring up some Ford Trophy stats that you were referring to. Only played 6 games of Ford Trophy, but he scored 273 runs at 45.5 average and a nifty old strike rate of 94. Jeet Raval giving it a fucking little whack. 100 and 250, so that's 3 50-plus scores in 6 innings. Jeet Raval, beauty little Ford Trophy campaign. Plunkett Shield, though, 9 innings, 5 games, and 176 runs at an average of 19.55. So, that Plunkett Shield record and his Black Caps performances, many people would just think, oh, Black Caps, he was shit for the Black Caps, that's why he got dropped. Yeah, that's pretty much all that matters, but you got to also know that Jeet Raval wasn't very good on the Plunkett Shield, so that impacts your confidence. Like, that builds the narrative around his Black Caps omissions. So Jeet Raval's like, you're kind of thinking, ooh, where does Jeet Raval sit in New Zealand cricket moving forward? Is he going to genuinely fight and grip onto that Black Caps chance, because Jeet Raval's a very smart dude. Jeet Raval, I think he rocks the BDO stickers on his bat because he's like worked as an accountant and shit like that. So Jeet Raval, no dramas if, like, obviously he's loves cricket, wants to play cricket, but of the domestic cricketers, Jeet Raval and is among those cricketers who would happily, not happily, but very easily walk away from cricket straight into another career field. So it's just like Jeet Raval's Black Caps opening role is lost. He's a bit in no man's land. What's he going to do? Wouldn't be mad if Jeet Raval just like kept things normal and was like, that's it. Just going to battle away from Auckland and move on. But Jeet Raval's like, nah, he wants to hold on to this. He wants to make a massive play at this, and he took matters into his own hands and moved to the Northern Districts Knights to shake things up, one would assume, in pursuit of another Black Caps opportunity. So shout out Jeet Raval. He's persevering, he's kicking on, he's battling through, and who knows where this will end up, but at least Jeet Raval's made a significant change. At least Jeet Raval's gone out on a limb to do something, because like we talked a lot about Tom Blundell for a long time. Now, like, who knows how long Tom Blundell will be in good form in Test cricket. Who knows about Devon Conway's international performances? Who knows if Will Young's going to step up? Like, these are all somewhat to be expected, but they're definitely not guaranteed. So Jeet Raval's, he's kicking on, he's kicking through, and based on his Ford Trophy record, do you have a similar perspective about Jeet Raval maybe wanting to just play more white ball cricket as well? Because you look at the Auckland Aces, and no matter how good Jeet Raval is as a batsman, he's going to struggle to crack that Auckland Aces Ford Trophy or Super Smash team, because there's just so much quality, like domestic cricket quality in that Aces lineup that is perfectly suited to white ball cricket. So it might also be a little move from Jeet Raval to just play more cricket, as opposed to being a 2-format player for the Aces and perhaps moving forward a 1-format player for the Aces. Now he goes to the Knights and he might be a 3-format player, and that just might be more enjoyable. Playing more cricket might just be more enjoyable. On the back of, like, I'll have a look while I throw this over to you, Wildcard. Maybe the season before 2018 or 2017, Jeet Raval was massive in a Auckland Aces Ford Trophy winning campaign as well, I think. So he might have a couple of seasons of good List A form. So, but what do you make of the format stuff and trying to suss out Jeet Raval's intentions in terms of just playing more formats?
That's a hell of a point, actually, because when you think about it, because I'm pretty sure you're right. I'm pretty sure he has got a decent record in recent years. Like, it's not just an anomaly that he had a good little run of form there in the Ford Trophy this year. Like, he has done well in the past too, but you also, you don't look at Jeet Raval and think middle order batsman or anything like that. So if he's going to be playing for the Aces, he does kind of need to be top 3. Probably as an opener, maybe you could get him in first drop. But if everyone's available for the Aces, then you've got Guptill and Munro, Glenn Phillips, Mark Chapman, not even to mention the fellas like the O'Donnells and etc., etc. It's a stacked batting lineup. It's a pretty, Guptill and Munro are going to disappear often during that time with various Black Caps duties if the 2020 team's involved, or Guptill also, key part of the ODI team as well. So he would get his opportunities, but he wouldn't get to be first choice. So that does make sense. And I think it's not, I'm pretty sure I'd have to look this up, and I don't think I'm going to be bothered to do so while we record, but I'm pretty confident that Jeet Raval is on the record as saying, not just since he's been dropped from the Test team, but before that, while he was in that comfortable, solid Test match, contracted player kind of role, I'm pretty sure he was still on record then as saying he had ambitions to play in the to play white ball cricket for New Zealand as well then. And I mean, it's one thing to say you want to do so. It's another thing to go out there and actually make it happen. But at least like it's an example that like this level of sort of gutsiness and ambition from Jeet Raval, which you really do have to applaud, because he has done, like you say, like he's done something proactive to not just prolong his career, but to give it maybe even a shot in the arm and to really reinvent it, sort of thing. Like he's given himself an opportunity to do that, and the Northern Districts batting lineup, I mean, Northern Districts didn't have a fantastic season through most of the formats this past sort of campaign. They have a lot of guys who, if everyone was available, they'd be sweet as, but not, a lot of black caps who quite often aren't around to help them out, which means that a lot of their sort of younger players coming through are kind of thrust out there, and it can be a little bit tricky. They do have, like, for example, Henry Cooper is one of the top young opening batsmen in the country, particularly in the longer form stuff, at least. Jeet Raval would come in quite nicely as the kind of, like, experienced shoulder to lean on for him as well. Like, I think there's a lot of benefits, thinking of it now as we talk through it, there are a lot of benefits to Northern Districts as well, particularly if he's not going to be playing Black Caps cricket. And if he is going to play Black Caps cricket again, well, it's going to be because of his performances for Northern Districts. Like, he's going to have to play himself into that team, which means it's kind of a win-win either way for Northern. And also, the other one to throw out for ND as well is that Daniel Flynn retired, didn't he, recently? So I suppose there's also another sort of veteran presence, even veteran presence left-handed top order batsman role that has been vacated too, which I guess you could say similar to the way that Daryl Mitchell fits in with Canterbury, fill it like just straight swap for Andy Ellis. Maybe there's a little bit of a hint of that with Daniel Flynn stepping down and Jeet Raval stepping in.
I definitely agree. They need to bolster their batting. So if you are going to take the Northern Districts Knights perspective, they need more batsmen. Jeet Raval needs runs. So that's a good little match. In the 2017-18 Ford Trophy wildcard, Jeet Raval was 9th in runs. 302 runs at an average of 43. Now that gives Jeet Raval his last 3 seasons of Ford Trophy cricket, List A cricket. He only played 4 games in 2016-17, average of 39. 7 games 2017-18, average of 43. 6 games 2019-20, average of 45. So Jeet Raval is in a little purple patch in the Ford Trophy for the last few seasons. So there are signs there, like as you said, his intention, like that, and your throwing back to what Jeet Raval himself may have said, I think there is scope there for Jeet Raval to express his white ball batsmanship for the Knights as well. The other mover is Finn Allen, and a little less interesting. He is one of the, like many view him as one of the better young batsmen in Aotearoa. He just probably wouldn't have played too much for the Auckland Aces, and he probably thought, and the Wellington Firebirds probably thought, that he should be playing domestic cricket. And yeah, as we've alluded to with Jeet Raval, getting into that Auckland Aces batting lineup isn't the most easiest thing. And Finn Allen, in assessing him as a New Zealand batting prospect, I kind of reserve judgment, because there are signs that he could be very good. Like, he's scored, this is the thing in favour of Finn Allen, is he's scored runs for these New Zealand 11s. He had a century against England. He had an 84 against India A, England 11. So he's like stepped up to that level and scored runs. Hasn't done quite as much at the domestic cricket level. So first class average of 25, List A average of 20. Only played like a bunch of games, obviously, because he's still young. Compared to like someone like Rachin Ravindra, who has scored plenty of domestic runs to go with the runs against for Aotearoa A in different formats. So that's kind of, there's levels to the batting prospect measurements in my mind. You got Rachin Ravindra scoring runs pretty much wherever he goes. And then you've got someone like Finn Allen who has scored runs at the New Zealand 11 situation level, hasn't quite served up truckloads of runs in the domestic level early small sample size. So I think moving to Wellington is going to spice things up and may see Finn Allen break through and establish himself as on that kind of Rachin Ravindra, maybe Henry Cooper, Ken McClure, that kind of level of young batsman in Aotearoa.
And Wellington have first of all, Wellington have the pedigree because they're defending Blanket Shield champions now. Also, Wellington have that sort of, they've shown a willingness to give a guy like Rachin Ravindra a go, and Ravindra and Finn Allen, I'm pretty sure, were part of the same wave of 19s, weren't they, for New Zealand? I think Finn Allen was the captain of that team, wasn't he? Or am I getting that wrong?
I wouldn't have a clue. I don't. Yeah.
Either way, they were both prominent batsmen in that.
There's a different under-19 World Cup every year.
Yeah, that's the truth. They're both prominent players from there, and probably the two best batting prospects that have emerged at this stage anyway. They're both like sort of 21, so, plenty of time for everyone. But yeah, like linking up with a dude like that who's been given a good opportunity in Wellington, he can hopefully get a good opportunity himself. Same situation as Raval. You already said this, like Auckland is pretty well stacked. Difficult to get a go there. I watched him bat when he played a first class game at Cobham a little like start of this year, and I specifically hung around to get a look at him, and I think he battled around for like 20 odd balls and didn't score hardly any runs. Like it wasn't the kind of innings where you watch and you're like, yeah, this guy's definitely going to play Black Caps one day. But it was only one innings, and technically he looks good, and he's got a lot of people saying the right things about him. Probably not quite on the same level as like the hype around Rachin Ravindra, but still like the next thing to that, I suppose. So yeah, he hasn't played a lot of cricket for Auckland. He was sort of like one of the next guys up, but they've got quite a few guys in that next guy up kind of pool of players to pick from. So yeah, I guess it's pretty simple from his perspective. It's just all about where he can get the most cricket and the best level of development for his cricket, and has decided that's Wellington, and it seems like as good a decision as any.
Pretty good decision from Sarpreet Singh to make the move over to the Bundesliga, where
it'd have been a brave man not to.
Just a hard and fast answer here is wildcard. I love the package of Bundesliga. Like, they do a great job of YouTube content, social media content, very informative. Like, a lot of it's in English, tactics and information. So shout out to the Bundesliga. But hard and fast reply here, is the Bundesliga like the trendiest league in the world?
Ooh, trendiest. Like, that kind of depends on your definition of trendiest, because
like all the cool kids who like football, whether it's the American hipsters or just some football nerd who's an appreciation of the football played. Like, it just feels like Bundesliga, if you're getting into football or if you're a deep football person, it's just the cool thing,
Yeah, it probably is, to be honest. Like, I mean, you'd have some competition with Spain, but I think just the general dominance of Barcelona, Real Madrid over the last 20 years maybe takes some of the shine off that. If you wanted to be an Atletico Madrid fan, maybe that would tick some of those boxes, but at the same time, they're a very gritty kind of defensively minded team. Whereas in Germany, you get a lot of quite like, yeah, I think the German style of play that you see in Bundesliga, and I've watched quite a bit of it over the last few weeks because it's been the bulk of the football that has existed over that time. Like, it is really a modern style of play. You get a lot of high pressing, a lot of energy, quick pace, sharp passing, a lot of 1-2 touch stuff as well. Like, lots of movement around. Particularly if you watch Bayern and Dortmund, like a little bit as well with a team like Bayer Leverkusen. I think maybe a and RB Leipzig as well. Both those two teams are sort of like begging to be taken seriously in that same category as well. But yeah, in particular, like Dortmund and Bayern are just on a level beyond, and Bayern have proven over the last month or two that they are themselves on a level beyond Dortmund as well, because they've just absolutely it looked like there was going to be a title race when they came back, but Bayern just cruised. They haven't lost a game this year. They haven't, they've won every single game since the restart came back. They actually, in competitive football, they haven't lost a game since Sarpreet Singh made his debut for the team back in December, which is insane to think about. And also a little bit of perspective when you look at the fact that Singh has been on the bench 5 times in a row now without getting off the bench at any point to partake in any of these games. Well, you look at a team that's won 22 out of 23 games and it was a draw the other one, and on their current run of form, that's a pretty tough team to break into. And yeah, they're technically pretty supreme probably in Germany. It's what lets it down compared to some of the the thing that the Premier League has above every other league in Europe is that it does have the high quality at the top, but it also has the lower teams just more competitive. There's more money, which means those teams fighting for relegation in the Premier League are outbuying mid-table German or Spanish teams. The models in Spain in particular, the model of how the broadcasting money's distributed isn't particularly fair. They just give it to the teams that people watch the most, and then they watch them the most because they're the best, which means all the money filters through to Real Madrid and Barcelona some more, and the rich get richer. Italy is not the trendiest tactical league, so that you probably, Ronaldo turning up there helps them a little bit, but yeah, I think in terms of trendiness, you probably would lean towards Germany. It's probably kind of comfortable with difference now that I think about it.
Rightio, you went full circle there. You broke down Sarpreet, and then you swung,
I brought it back around.
You swung it back around. For the folks listening, that's not hard and fast, but it's good enough. The old mate Sarpreet wildcard. How do you? So if you're a footballing nerd or just a football person, you're going to be understanding the situation here with Sarpreet Singh. You're going to be a factor is going to be Bayern Munich's one of the biggest and best clubs in the world, and Sarpreet Singh, little dude who once played for Papatoa United, going from the Wellington Phoenix, little Kiwi kid. He's with Bayern Munich. It doesn't really matter how much he contributed. The fact that he's there, the fact that he is won a Bundesliga with Bayern Munich, that is epic, that is undeniable, that is crazy. For the more casual Kiwi sports fan, they might still have that appreciation, but they're not going to necessarily, I don't think they'll give it the same credit because, Sarpreet Singh's barely played. But as you said, just being able to crack the bench, it's a weird, because I'm reading your Flying Kiwis thing here, and it's there's different levels of measurement here, because you're not necessarily saying Sarpreet Singh played this amount of minutes, Sarpreet Singh had this amount of touches, Sarpreet Singh did this and that playing. It's instead Sarpreet Singh had X amount of bench appearances. He made the bench on this many games. So it's a bit of a mindfuck, because it is a different way of thinking about appreciating a sportsman or a sportswoman, if you catch my drift there. We're not dealing with watching Sarpreet Singh play in the Bundesliga. It's epic because Sarpreet Singh made the bench for the Bundesliga champions this many times, and that's ridiculous. Do you get my vibe there?
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of contextual appreciation that it requires,
yeah.
It's not it's not like talking about Abby Erceg winning league titles in America, and just she's captaining her team, she's playing every single minute, she's leading them, and all the major defensive stats, she's getting named teams of the season every year kind of thing. It's a very different kind of situation, but also that's because Sarpreet Singh's on the other side of his career too, where he's because that's the crazy thing to keep in of all of the context around this, the main thing Like we could talk about the merits of being awarded a winner's medal, which apparently he will be for playing one game and 8 total minutes of a game which they won 6-1. Like it's a late sub. Earning you a medal for that, sure, okay. I don't think that would meet the requirements in the Premier League. I'm pretty sure you got to get 5 games in there. Although they do have dispensations, like you can. Usually they do that for players who have been injured and would have played the games but were not able to for whatever reason, or for reserve goalkeepers because they're an important part of the squad who barely ever get to play. So it's got to be the weirdest job in the world to be a reserve goalkeeper at a top club who has, like, for example, a Manuel Neuer there, like, who's just re-signed as well. So whoever there's Sven Ulreich is the backup keeper for Bayern Munich. So he might want to leave if he wants to actually play football. But often those reserve keepers end up as sort of like kind of half player, half coach kind of roles, which is it's actually kind of a cool thing to do because you get that experienced dude, and then there's always a couple youngsters coming through, and you end up doing a lot of coaching as well with that kind of role. The plight of the reserve goalkeeper is always a strange one for that reason. But like for Sarpreet Singh, just getting signed was the major, like, we could look at this in terms of like dominoes falling, like one falls and the next falls and the next falls, kind of thing, or like the progress along his pathway. But I think like the major factor is that as long as the first one falls, the other ones are going to keep falling until someone does something to disrupt it, kind of thing. So it's a little bit of inevitability if you look at it from that point of view. I try to look at it from it's just that I'm mixing my metaphors now because this metaphor works on one point of view but doesn't work on the other point of view. Like the point of view that just getting the ball rolling in that way from getting that transfer in the first place, like the hard work was done to get to that point. But then at the same time, and then like that's why he's in this situation now. But then at the same time, once you get there, you don't get anything for free. And we've seen that where like he was only signed to a reserve contract in the first place. He's expected to be part of the reserve team, 3-year deals. So they wanted to, I guess you think of that in terms of a progression. First year, just play for the reserves the whole time, do as well as you can. Second year, maybe you get to a few subs appearances. Third year, you're hoping to be pushing through for that first team. And then at the end of that, you either re-sign because you see the way through, or you go somewhere else because you've developed nicely, but you need first team football kind of thing. Like he's already, after 1 year, pushing through that first team. Like he got onto that preseason tour. He wasn't expected to be even part of the first team training system at that point. He ended up going to preseason with them to like LA or wherever it was, playing against teams like Tottenham, and I think they might have played in Germany they might have done a couple different preseason things. I forget now. It's so bloody long ago. So much has happened in the world since then. But like, at first, they were short on players. He got on the bench after doing well in preseason, got on the bench for their Super Cup game, got on the bench for their first league game, for their first cup game. Then the transfer window came. They signed Coutinho. They signed Ivan Perisic. He's pushed back in the order, goes back down to the reserves, where he's then like their best player for the next 6 months or whatever, rewarded in mid-December when the coach gets sacked and the new one comes in. Hansi Flick calls him and a couple other guys up to train full-time with the first team. He then gets on the bench for a few games just before the winter break. He gets on the field, makes his debut in one of those games. Then, obviously, the winter break, goes off, does some training stuff with the team, he had a little bit of a disjointed time through the second half with the reserves because, and the reserve stuff's still going, so he might still get some more games there, I don't know, but like he had a red card that was a dodgy looking red card. That meant he was suspended for the first couple games back, and then he played off the bench once or twice there after that. So, but then there was a big old pandemic which slowed everyone down. But now coming back out of that, like there are a few injuries, which is why he's being considered in these squads. But like he's been on the bench 5 times in a row for them. He hasn't got to play those games, but the fact he's been on his longest run of first team match day squad appearances, it just continues on a progression of like at every opportunity, Sarpreet Singh seems to make that step forward rather than, because you can't even, like, it's so competitive at a club like Bayern. They've got so many good players and it's so few opportunities. You just gotta, like, you can't even afford to plateau. Like, you can't afford to take a sideways step. You have to keep pushing your case forward at every opportunity. And it seems so far through his first season that he's done that. Whether that's translated into actual appearances or not isn't the important thing. The important thing is to see that the progress behind the scenes is being made, because those actual like first team appearances, there's just too much outside of his control going on. You don't know if who's going to be signed in the next transfer window, who might leave, who's going to be injured or suspended at any point. These things are all things that he has no say over. Whether the coach is just in a mood to give a young player a go, whether the game's going to be in the right situation to even allow that. Like, all these things have nothing to do with him. He's just got to stay ready and just be there, available when the time comes. And the time will come eventually if you keep on doing those things. But if you slack off, if you fall back, someone else steps up, takes your place, you're further down the pecking order, It's just a matter of, at every one of those little crossroad kind of ventures, he's just got to make sure he does the positive, proactive thing. And to date, it seems like he has done.
How would you describe and explain Sarpreet Singh as a player from what you've seen? Maybe go back to the Phoenix as well to provide the context around what he's doing with Bayern Munich when you have seen him play for the reserves team, or whatever appearances you've seen from him during his tenure with Bayern Munich. And so just describe Sarpreet Singh as a player, as a prospect, what he does well, where he tends to play, just the basics. And then what does that mean for the All Whites? Would Sarpreet Singh have a similar role with the All Whites, or is he going to be used from what you've seen of the All Whites in a slightly different capacity for the All Whites? How does his role and skills translate from the Bayern Munich system and club to the All Whites representing Aotearoa as part of the golden generation?
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting question, because what we saw from him at the Phoenix was generally you want him as a central attacking midfield kind of playmaker. And his game was still pretty raw at the Phoenix. I expect if you chucked him in there now, he'd look quite a different player just from the level he's been training at over the last 12 months. So, I think his game is really well suited to all those things we're talking about, like the modernity of the German game. Like that kind of stuff. It is quite technical. He's a good technical player, and he'll be getting much better in those areas as well. He's not the fastest or the strongest, certainly not the strongest, but he's quite smart and instinctive, and he moves well, and he can make clever late runs into the penalty area, but in particular his passing is very proactive and creative, and those kind of things will hopefully be developing even further to make sure he's not just, when you get better players around you making better runs as well, that also helps to unlock those kind of abilities too. So there's a lot of ways in which that is held, but it's his, as a player on the outside looking in for the Bayern first team, you've kind of got to, you can't really be a specialist. You got to be able to play in wherever you're needed. And when he was playing for the team in preseason, he was chucked in at probably the easiest position to work a youth player in, which was, I think, out on the left wing. And that's still probably the position. Bayern tend to play sort of a 4-2-3-1 kind of shape. So that is an area where if you were, and they've got a rotation of wingers, guys like Gnabry and Coman and Perisic while he's there. Coutinho is unlikely to play for them again. I think his loan deal is going to run down, and they're not too bothered about that. They might keep him around just to have the numbers for the Champions League, but don't think he'll be re-signed into next season. But they'll probably sign someone like Leroy Sané instead. So whether that, but because that's the thing, is that's a position he has played for the reserves, but generally for the reserves you see him more in that role that he played for the Phoenix, which is that central attacking kind of playmaker, or you see him playing a little deeper as a midfielder, which I don't think they'd really look at him doing in the Bundesliga. Certainly not yet anyway. Maybe if he gets a bit older and bulks up a bit more. I mean, if you look at the dude like Leon Goretzka who's playing there at the moment, Leon Goretzka is pretty ripped. So I don't think Sarpreet could take him in an arm wrestle, and I think they quite like that physical presence there. Being the bullying kind of team that Bayern are, more on a psychological level than a physical level. But you still want a dude who can enforce the play a little bit more. And Yeah, for the all-weights, I think you'd probably see him in that role, which is his best role, because he suddenly goes from being a guy trying to push into a team to being like one of the key players in a team. So Danny Hayes seems to quite like the old 4-3-3. I think that would probably, if you set a team up from that shape where you have like Joe Bell as the sort of holding kind of midfielder, Ryan Thomas as the playmaking midfielder next to him, and then Sarpreet Singh as an attacking midfielder in front of them, you've probably got a pretty useful trio there. All players who are, how old is Ryan Thomas now? Probably about 26 or something like that. Maybe not even that old, but all guys who at the oldest are in their mid-20s. Joe Bell's only about 20 now, 21 probably. Sarpreet Singh is 21 exactly. I know that for sure because I was writing about him yesterday. So, I mean, there's your midfield going forward for the next 2 World Cup cycles if you want, and it's borderline the best midfield New Zealand, like the best midfield trio New Zealand would ever have been able to put out there, or just throw that one out there. Certainly, like at this stage of their careers, if they go on to develop at the pace that they currently are, then for sure. I mean, you got a player there who's playing like top flight in Norway, and he's like a few months into his first professional contract, excluding the pandemic stuff. You got Ryan Thomas, who's playing for PSV Eindhoven, like multiple, one of the most like dynastic teams in Holland, and then you've got a guy at Bayern Munich who are borderline the best team in Europe right now. Like, that's unprecedented as far as New Zealand football goes.
I'll ask you for any extra nugget or any extra information or insight that you want to add on top of all of that. But I'll do so with a little caveat that you talk about this, the cosmic alignment before any bits of extra. Like what's this cosmic alignment of Kiwi football and German football that you've sussed out with a little bit of Sarp?
Yeah, mate. I was going to come around to this even if you didn't trigger it. So Sarpreet wins the Bundesliga title with Bayern Munich. He's the second New Zealander to play in the Bundesliga, the second New Zealander to win a Bundesliga title as well, because Winton Rufer back in the day played for Werder Bremen. He won the Bundesliga in 1992-93. Very different circumstances in terms of playing. Sarpreet Singh played 8 minutes, whereas Winton Rufer played all but 2 games and scored 17 goals. He was his club's top goal scorer and one of their absolute top players. So slightly different factors there. Also slightly different, completely different times of their career as well. So, keep that in mind. But who did Bayern Munich beat to win that title was Werder Bremen, Winton Rufer's old club. Who did Winton Rufer's old club, Werder Bremen, finish 1 point ahead of to win his Bundesliga title? It was Bayern Munich back in the early 90s. Who did Sarpreet Singh make his club debut for the senior team back in December? It was Werder Bremen in the reverse fixture when they played them earlier in the campaign. Where did Sarpreet Singh come up playing a lot of his football anyway? It was under the tutelage of a certain Winton Rufer through his academy, through the Winners Academy, and also through their connections with Onehunga Sports. So a little bit of just a whole lot of ways in which the history of Winton Rufer playing in the Bundesliga, and then the future and the present of Sarpreet Singh playing in that same league, just seem to, everything's connected in that way,
It is, in the most beautifully divine way. Any other information to add, or should we I'll roll into a couple more footballers, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I reckon we chuck out a couple of these other Flying Kiwis notes and not pretend that Sarpreet Singh is the only one doing it, even though he did the most amazing thing this week, despite not taking the field at all. There's a lot of other leagues that are opening up at the moment, and you had, mentioned Joe Bell just before, got a dozen minutes off the bench for Viking in their first game. They lost to a team called Bodo Glimt, lost 4-2. That team finished second last season, so it was a game they weren't necessarily expected to win. He came off the bench, made his debut for the team at the first possible opportunity. Beautiful stuff there. Matt Garbett also did exactly the same thing in the top flight of Sweden for Falkenbergs, and he played just a couple minutes. He was a double sub right before full time. I think they won 1-0. So again, like Garbett's a couple years younger than Joe Bell as well. He's only I think he's still only 18, and he's already played first division minutes and like top flight minutes in Sweden for his new team. Joe Bell already getting minutes there for Viking. Both of them seem like most likely they're going to be, in the very least, like starting the season as like considered bench options, like bench players who the coach is actually going to be interested in going towards. And from that point, you've got a platform to push your case for further opportunities as the season progresses as well, and maybe even break into those starting teams in their first season as professionals as well. And you think about how tough it is for Kiwi footballers to crack in. I mean, I was listening. I think I referenced this last podcast too. I was listening to Aaron Clapham on the Between Two Bears podcast. He was talking about how he didn't go overseas and play, and one of the things he was saying is about how like he didn't just want to play at some like lower league team just for the sake of playing, like saying I played overseas. Like he wanted to play at a high competitive level and also be like a contributing player, and that's difficult because if you're coming in from New Zealand, you're going to cost a bit more money for teams just for various reasons, not necessarily transfer fees, but like logistical reasons. Where's this player going to stay? How are we going to house them? Are we going to fund the fact that they're living in a foreign country? Maybe they need like language lessons, these kind of things as well. They don't know the city. Someone's going to have to help them around. Various things. And so to break into a team as a New Zealander from that point of view, you can't just be as good as the local players they could otherwise sign because it's not worth the hassle. If you're just equal players, they're going to sign the guy who lives down the road. You've got to be better than that. And we're already coming from a situation where for a lot of the time it was very, very hard to be better than those players as the New Zealand players. Now perhaps some of the pathways that exist now with like Ole Academy, which Garbett came through, the Phoenix Academy, which Bell came through, like perhaps that's not like the level of player we're producing is higher, but that you've still got to overcome those other logistical things. You've got to overcome the reputational thing where people see a guy from New Zealand and they don't necessarily take that name seriously compared to like a Brazilian or a Spaniard on a long list of names on a scout sheet or something like that. In the old Football Manager database or whatever, you know, it's a tricky one to automatically be as competitive as those two guys seem like they're going to be in their first season as professionals, as young players too, is just like automatically crazy.
Automatic. Any other Wahine female footballers coming back into the action?
There will be. By the end of this month, the NWSL in America will have gotten back into functionality. They're going to do a weird little like World Cup style tournament thing just to kick things off. Hopefully, have a regular season after that. But they've been in a bit of a rush because they wanted to be like. They're in a tricky place because their national women's team in America obviously is like beloved and incredibly successful and everything, but that just for whatever reason has never translated down into the club level stuff. Part of that is because some of those national team players don't take it as seriously as they could, which is also to be expected when you're paid centrally by the national team. Suddenly you don't have the same incentives to play those club tournaments, which can be a little bit disjointed. There's been like a few different variations of it. There's been like the current NWSL version of it, I think, is coming into its 8th season, I think, as an entity. Before that, you had different various leagues. It's all been a bit messy. So it's still trying to sort of assert itself, and it wanted to become. They've got a new commissioner this year for the NWSL, and they wanted to be the first American like sports team league back, and it looks like they will be. So that will start towards the end of the month, and that's kind of where the power structure lies for the Flying Kiwis Wahine, because you've got like Abby Urseg there, obviously borderline best player in the team. Captain Ali Riley this season is over there. Or Katie Bowen, who's a regular starter, and Rosie White, who's usually a regular starter. All four of them different clubs, so give them 2 weeks, they'll be back playing football. The Norwegian League is coming back at the same time, and CJ Bott would have been a part of that, but she had to have meniscus surgery on her knee earlier this year, so she'll miss the next month or two. That's the start of their season, so hopefully she'll be back midway through to play the end of it. She's at a new club, Vålerenga. She was playing in Sweden before that. Hannah Wilkinson is trying to get over to Sweden to start with her new club, Djurgårdens, however the hell you say that. They're starting soon. Oh, they might be starting this weekend, I think, or sometime soon anyway. She's probably not going to go straight into the team just because she's been in New Zealand throughout lockdown. So I don't even know how you get to Sweden at this point. I don't know how many flights, or if there are even flights you can catch. I've no idea how that's going to work at the moment with the different borders and whatever. So probably best to give her a little bit of a wide berth in terms of how long it takes her to get in there. And a lot of these other leagues, I guess also you got Michaela Moore, who has been playing in Germany for the last couple of weeks, and she's like hot in a bloody like feisty relegation battle with 3 games to go. So that one's certainly one to keep an eye on. One of the top, also one of the most enjoyable of the football firm players to watch as well, Michaela Moore. She's one of those players who will never ever take a backward step. And yeah, trying to will her team to stay up in the top flight, which like fingers crossed they do, because that's a rather massive development if they do or don't, either way. But a lot of these other leagues with the women's football, it's kind of sad because you get a lot of examples of where you get people in power saying the right things about how much they support women's football, and then when like push comes to shove, they're not willing to make it's all good to throw some like excess money towards the English league, for example, when everyone's getting paid, but suddenly when things like purses tighten a little bit, the women's game is one of the first to be cut off, and they're not going to finish any of those seasons, prioritizing trying to start next season instead. So there's a few stories like that around the world as well, where there just aren't necessarily the same priorities that there should be, or that there would be during like when times are good. Maybe when times are tough, the people revert back to the way things were before, which is a little bit sad and frustrating to see, but I don't know, so it goes.
Just quickly here, give us a bit more description around Michaela Moore. Like a relegation battle absolutely gets me frothing and fizzing and ready to enjoy the next couple of weeks action. I think you can. Football's lucky enough where you got a relegation thing that you can get excited about as well. So, what's the situation with Michaela Moore and her relegation battle? Like, what club's she with? What are the clubs she's competing? You got a bit more info on that, just for people out there looking for a bit of Kiwi sports content to tune in with a bit riding on it. I think that's quite exciting.
Yeah, the old relegation battles always give, if you can give those lower table teams something to play for, something that's absolutely desperate as well, it always keeps things nice and funky. She plays for MSV Duisburg, and they had a couple really good results coming straight back out of the lockdown, including a last-minute equalizer to get a draw against FC Cologne. And that was a pretty extremely valuable point, because if they'd lost that game, they'd have been in big trouble. But to get that draw, it kept them ahead of Cologne, and then now Cologne have, in the next 2 games, come away with 2 sneaky 1-0 wins, both with goals in the last 10 minutes of games. And they've lost 1 since. Duisburg have also lost 1 or 2 since. So I think there's 3 games to go. Bayer Leverkusen are also in this race. You've got USV Jena, who are a club that have had quite a few New Zealanders over the years actually playing for them as well. I don't think they've won a game all season, so they're they're dead set to go down. They're no worries there. But those other 3 teams, there's 1 point between them. Duisburg, as it stands, because of, I think, lesser goal difference and being on, I think it's 15 points, and Cologne are on 16, and Leverkusen are on 15 as well, with a slightly bit of goal difference. I think that's how the table looks. I'm not looking at it at the moment, so Pardon my memory if I stray, but that's how it looks with 3 games to go. So Duisburg are like on the outside looking in as it stands, and they have 2 pretty tough games coming up as well. And also add in that Bayer Leverkusen play the bottom place team this weekend, I think. So they would be expected to win that and put some space between them as well. It will depend a bit on those other teams, Leverkusen and Cologne, not winning again. It would be ideal for them, or at least if one of those teams cannot win again. But like the big one is the one to circle is the last game of the season where Duisburg play Jena, the bottom team. So that is an automatic must win. If they don't beat the bottom team, then they're going to deserve to be relegated because everyone else in that situation will have. So can't be leaving those points on the table. And then it's just a matter of if they can get against some of the better mid-table teams over their next 2 games, if they can get a draw or 2 or even a sneaky win, like that would be absolutely enormous for their fates. But yeah, beyond a doubt that last game is going to be a must-win, so there's a very, very high percentage chance it comes down to that final game of the season. Which I guess as a fan, that's what you want. As a neutral fan anyway, as someone not wanting to see a New Zealander get relegated, maybe it would be nicer if they could just win these next 2 games and not have to worry about it.
Praise up. Chuck a prayer their way for the football success. We'll wrap it up there, Wildcard. Thank you very much for that football knowledge. And we'll be dropping another email newsletter tomorrow. Come back early next week for another podcast. Stay tuned. Kia kaha. Stay beautiful. Cha-cha.